Africa suffered an almost fully synchronized economic downturn in 2020, but the continent largely emerged from recession in 2021, and the recovery looks set to accelerate in 2022. It's easy to get caught up in focusing on the continent's big economies, Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, Angola, and South Africa. But as life slowly returns to normal amid low vaccination rates after a year of recovery from COVID-19 lockdowns, it is expected that growth in sub-Saharan Africa's big economies will be mixed into the new year. Still, for the sub-Saharan region overall, the IMF forecasts just a 0.1 percentage points increase in growth to 3.8% for 2022. This hides deep divergences. South Africa, Nigeria, and Angola, which together make up about half of sub-Saharan Africa's GDP, were in deep trouble before COVID-19, and their sluggishness is expected to continue into 2022. Those bouncing back will be Rwanda and the Seychelles, which will see well above the 3.8 growth projected for the region, and medium-sized economies such as the Ivory Coast and Ghana. Today, we're looking at African economies to watch in 2022. I'm Tolulope, Adeleru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Now, joining me from Nairobi, Kenya is Ali Khan Sachu, Africa geoeconomist and macro analyst, as well as the CEO of Rich Management. Ali Khan, welcome once again to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so as we get into this conversation, we know that there were a number of carryover issues that have followed the continent and economies across the continent into 2022. So just give us a few of your top issues that you know will have to be addressed by the continent's economy if we're going to see some progress and some growth in this new year.
So, as you mentioned in your introduction, it was a very tough year last year. In fact, really, the pandemic did not hit us as badly as the economic hit was much more severe than the pandemic appears to have been. But the pandemic still remains an exogenous uncertainty. We saw this big flare-up in South Africa. And I think caseload is actually at a record high as we speak, but most people think it's reasonably mild for now. I'm not so convinced of that conclusion. But, we saw a lot of extra debt being taken on. African countries had borrowed heavily coming into 2020. There'd been a lot of borrowing. A lot of debt on the balance sheets, and then this was compounded in the recession with countries borrowing even more. So I think one of the big issues is going to be the spillover of debt, is how countries now look to rein the debt in. And the only way to really do something about that is to have some growth. And as you said, most expectations are that the growth will be quite subdued. We're going to underperform all other continents in the world, according to the IMF. And I therefore think that the key issues for policymakers across the continent is how to right-size our economies and reposition them for faster growth. The positive tailwinds are the African Free Trade Continental Agreement. If that can be executed, and that's a big if, that would be a significant boost if we could do that. But I'm not sure that we're going to manage that this year. And then I think, hopefully a better structure for commodity prices. One of the countries you mentioned was Angola, which had really suffered from low oil prices, but is seeing a gentle recovery as the oil prices have firmed up. So if we can see better commodity prices, that should also support the recovery. But I think the challenge is going to be around debt.
So let me follow up with that, because we saw what happened in 2019 to 2020, particularly with Zambia for their debt, the first COVID-era sovereign debt default. In 2022 now, what countries do you think we need to keep our eyes on when it comes to their debt? We've heard from the World Bank that Nigeria needs to watch its debt levels. Right now, it's still sustainable, but further debts could lead into microeconomic shock and lead to destabilization. So what other countries do we really need to keep our eyes on who are at high risk of some defaults that would be a further negative, a further hurtful impact to their economy?
So just to quickly touch on your Zambia story, Zambia really, I think, is probably the recovery story for this year for me. I think you've got a very, very intelligent, sensible president. He's speaking, he's making all the right noises, he's putting money to work exactly where it should. And I'm very bullish about Zambia. You've already seen a great recovery in the bond price. You've seen a recovery in the currency, but I think that's got much more to go. And I think African countries should look at Zambia as an example of how, when you make the right decisions, the turnaround can happen. Going to the challenges that countries are facing, and you touched on Nigeria, a lot of people look at debt to GDP, but what you've got to really look at is debt service and government revenue, and how much governments are spending of their revenue on debt service. And this is the challenge for Nigeria at the moment. It's a challenge for Kenya, where, for example, 50 to 60 cents of every shilling is going towards debt service. So I think Nigeria, absolutely, we've got to keep an eye on it. I think the Nigerian government, has to make some tough decisions. It's failed to make those. And I think, at some point they will be forced, the market will force them to make it. Somewhere like Kenya is carrying a lot of debt. The debt service to revenue is very, very high. Angola, I think, is an improving story. South Africa, it's a very interesting situation. If we're looking at the big economies on the continent, only recently we saw the fire in the parliament, which speaks to the underlying tension in that economy. It has a lot of potential, but at the moment you have this sort of fissure in the society, which needs to be resolved before I think you get a good recovery. Medium-sized economies, I think, look better positioned to me. They're more nimble. You touched on Rwanda. You have very nimble, agile policy making going on there. Just to give you an example where Rwanda's getting it right, look at the airlines on the continent. Practically all of them are a bust. And Rwanda, Kenya's trying to merge Kenya Airways with South African Airways. I mean, that's like, that is a terrible trade, because you're merging two airlines which have significantly underperformed. Yeah. Whereas Rwanda tied up with Qatar. Qatar have got deep pockets. They can really reposition Rwanda Air to be a very strong airline across the country. And I think that speaks to very clever policy making at the Rwandan government level. Looking north, I think Egypt is interesting as well. A lot of growth I'm seeing coming online there. But overall, I think you've got these turnaround stories like Zambia. You've got the more complex challenges of the big countries, where I think policymakers have been a little bit slow to adjust. But overall, I think it's going to be a challenging year.
Okay, and I like that you touched on that, because I also did want to point out that 2020 was the year, 2021 was the year Africa came out of its worst recession in 50 years. So seeing that there were some positive stories, Rwanda, Zambia, as you said, it helps us to know that there is a path and there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So let's look at something else. We've talked all year throughout 2021 about FDI and how that took a big hit because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, Investment Monitor listed their top 5 countries to watch in 2022 when it comes to foreign direct investment. No surprise, Egypt tops the list. But this is where the surprises now come. Then you have Botswana, Morocco, Tanzania, and Ghana. You do not have Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa on that list, as many would typically expect. So are we missing out on certain things that might be happening in Botswana, Morocco, Tanzania, and Ghana? What's the story there?
So let me take the example of your first 3 choices that you came up with, which was Egypt, Morocco, Botswana. In all three countries, you have policymakers who really are a step ahead of everybody else. If you look at policy making coming out of those three countries, it's always joined up, it's intelligent, it understands what foreign investors are looking for, and it speaks the language of foreign investors. You have a degree of continuity. You don't have silly mistakes which other countries make, which put people on the defensive. So I think the first thing is even more than the opportunity, because there's opportunity in every one of our countries on this continent. It's all about how these policymakers are making the playing field attractive, not only to international investors, but also to other African investors and also to their own domestic investors. I think Tanzania, you spoke of Tanzania, it is a very attractive market. There's a lot of opportunity in there. There's, the commodities, both soft and hard commodities. And I think there's a positive reaction post Magufuli, who was extremely idiosyncratic and had his own ideas of how the economy should grow. But I think it comes up, if you'd asked me what is the magic ingredient to bake the FDI cake, it is having people who understand the language of investors. And if you've got that embedded in your civil service and in your team around you, it makes a dramatic difference. And I think that's what you're seeing in Botswana, that's what you're seeing in Egypt, and that's what you're seeing in Morocco.
All right, so very quickly before we go for a break, you mentioned commodities earlier, particularly crude oil, but we've seen a boom in commodities around the mid-2021 timeline, but it's expected that this boom will continue well into 2022 and also provide another year of strong performance for African producers and traders. Who do you think is going to benefit the most in the coming year from this commodities boom? We saw how it has helped Zambia as well, one of the largest gold producers on the continent. So what are we looking at in that area?
Of course, and we've got to mention the DR Congo, because the DR Congo is really at the forefront of the commodities that are required for the global economy in the future. So that is a very future-facing opportunity. The problem, when you look at commodities and people will say to you, oh, look at cobalt and look at this, you've also got to look at the population. And then you've got to think to yourself, what is the commodity value divided by the population? And when you look at somewhere like DR Congo, it actually ends up being very low because the population is very high. And this is the challenge with Nigeria as well. And this is also, then you look at someone like Botswana, small population, and therefore significant value to the commodity space. I think, there's going to be a lot of interest around natural gas. That's going to be the Mozambique story. If they can resolve the insurgency in the north of the country and the challenges around that. I think, part of the challenge for a lot of these commodity-based economies is that they are facing a lot of insurgency or asymmetric situations in country. Nigeria is another good example in the north as well. So it's not a silver bullet in the way sometimes it's presented. It only makes sense if you are able to monetize and make investments. And ultimately, the investments you've got to make from these commodity booms is in your people. You've got to educate them, because the most valuable commodity right now is our human capital, the population, this demographic dividend, which unfortunately won't be one unless we educate it and then gainfully employ our people.
All right, Ali Khan, hold on. When we come back, we'll get into more forecasts, because there's an interesting one which yet again puts the powerhouse economies of the continent at the back burner. And that's part of where we're going to pick up the conversation when we return. The IMF has released its projection for GDP growth across the world. And topping the list for African countries are those many would not expect. We'll get into the details after this. Still with me is Ali Khan Sachu, Africa geo-economist, and we're getting into the next parts where the International Monetary Fund has shared its forecast for projected gross domestic product growth Here's how African countries are expected to perform over the coming 2 years, ranked according to anticipated growth in 2022. The Seychelles comes tops with 7.7% expected growth in 2022. Rwanda is next with 7.0%, then Mauritius comes in with 6.7%. The Niger Republic should experience 6.6% growth, and Benin Republic rounds out the top 5 with 6.5% growth. Ali Khan, let me bring you back in here. What do you think is going to drive the growth in these economies in the coming year?
So firstly, these, as you can see, are the smaller economies on the continent, and therefore, agility, nimbleness all plays into this. And you have a low base effect. It's easier to grow something small faster than it is something bigger. That's just the nature of things. In that group that you showed, I mean, the Seychelles, I think, is a bet on tourism rebounding, and there still remain challenges around tourism, as we've seen of late. But it seems countries are now more prepared to open their economies, even in the face of surges in the virus. Rwanda, we've already discussed, nimble economy, well managed, able to move very, very quickly. So I think, and then it's a very attractive destination. Also, the numbers might not be enormous, but FDI feels comfortable going there. Kigali is a safe place. It's winning a lot of business from that basis. Mauritius, this has always been like an entry point for Africa for both Indian and Chinese investors. So it's really like a hub. And I think on the basis that the African economy is going to pick up, you should see more business come through there. Niger is interesting in the context of what's happening in Kazakhstan. Niger has a lot of uranium, but unfortunately, they're not able to monetize it sufficiently because of the French presence. And you can imagine they would do double-digit GDP if it was a pure play on uranium right now. And I think Benin, again, another small economy, low base effect, making good decisions and beginning to accelerate. So, for higher GDP growth rates, you've got to look at these medium and small countries. They're the ones that are going to outperform.
So then on the flip side, it's important to note that Kenya, the largest economy in East Africa, comes number 11. Egypt, the largest economy on the continent, in North Africa, but the highest person taking in FDI comes in at 22. Nigeria, the largest economy on the continent, comes in 44. Angola is 46, and South Africa is 48. That's the continent's most developed economy. And if you're looking at it on the flip side, is it just the population? Is just because of the size that these economies are going to struggle to really see a difference in their growth? Or is there anything else we need to really take a look at when it comes to Africa's powerhouse economies? These are the ones we focus on, but they're not giving us the numbers that we expect.
No, and unfortunately, because they're so big, it means it brings down the growth rate for the continent as a whole. I think you're looking at special situations amongst those 5 countries. I think Egypt is really very big population, 5.2% for a population of 100 million plus is a pretty good outcome. And I think, they might even surprise us to the upside. I think Kenya, the challenges, we got the election this year. Historically, we have challenges around the election. And then we got this very high debt, which we're having to work our way through, which is leaving very little headroom to pump money into the economy for growth. I think that's the challenge. Nigeria, really, it's an Egypt. I wish it had done the things that Egypt had done, let the currency go, find its own level. That would boost the economy as investors piled in. And I think, Nigerian policymakers for now have not taken the hard decisions they need to. But what's exciting about Nigeria really is the amount of money that's coming into the fintech, the IT sector. You're seeing a lot of cash flowing in there. I think that's going to surprise everybody this year as well. Angola, 2.4%. Look, they've been in recession for 5 years. So they've had negative growth, 5 consecutive year prints. So this is actually not a bad outcome. I think if you look at it from that perspective, Angola is a more bullish story than that 2.4% suggests. I think South Africa, look, the most sophisticated economy. You go there, you see the roads, you see the infrastructure, you look at the amount of electricity they produce. But their challenge remains a number of things. You've got very high unemployment. You've got this problem which continues to play out, which is with this sort of Zuma end of the party. And I think for now, there are many, many challenges. But, if South Africa can start stabilizing its political situation, I think you'll see much, much faster growth from there. But this is the challenge. The big elephants on the continent struggling for now.
All right, Ali Khan, as we wrap up, just give me the 3 factors or the trends that you think we need to watch out for that will shape the continent's recovery and economic performance in 2022.
So, as I said, I think, the main issue is policy making. You've got to understand, the policymakers in country, have they got the wherewithal to understand what is required? And I would say, people who are striking me as understanding it, Hichilema in Zambia, he gets it, ex-businessman, doing all the right things. The Sisi in Egypt, you could disagree with the way he's running the political side, but from an economic perspective, there is a bench there which is very strong and understands what's going on and is making very good moves. Morocco, as well as we said, in Botswana. I think the other big trends are really the global economy we've got to keep an eye on. Is the global economy still in the recovery mode? If it is, it's going to suck us along and it will be a positive tailwind for our economies. And then really, we've got to look at internal developments on the continent. We know we've got a very talented young pool of people. Are we educating them sufficiently? Is the African Trade Agreement, Free Trade Agreement, really going to do what it says on the ticket? If it does, then I think I would finish on that being really the key mover, key driver, internally generated driver for us. If we can get that going in a meaningful way, that would be a real big win.
All right, Ali Khan, thank you so much. I'll say Happy New Year. First time I'm seeing you in 2022, but I know we will definitely be talking throughout the year as we keep an eye on Africa's economy. Definitely appreciate your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And it's going to be an interesting year to watch. In 2020, the continent entered its first recession in 50 years, exited in 2021. Now, this is the year that African economies must cement their economic progress to bring back some of the gains that were made before the recession happened. The big economies are going to struggle, so this may be the year that the young shall grow, as we say here in Nigeria. We'll keep our eyes out for those economies. You're watching Business Edge. NC4 to Watch is up next. And as we talked about the African economies to look for in 2022, the issue of commodities came up, and that's where we start NC4 to Watch. Gold prices slipped on Thursday as U.S. Treasury yields edged higher minutes after the Federal Reserve's meeting, signaled quicker interest rate hikes to tame high inflation. Spot gold was down 0.4% to $1,802 per ounce, while U.S. gold futures fell 1.2% to $1,802. The vessel hired by Royal Dutch Shell to look for potential oil and gas fields is on course to leave South African waters after community groups won a court case to temporarily halt exploration activity. A judge on December 28, 2021 granted local activists an interim interdict blocking any seismic surveys until a ruling can be made on whether further environmental authorization is required. Kenya's increased capacity for handling transit petroleum products starts this month as the 40 billion shilling new Kepu oil terminal in Mombasa is complete. President Uhuru Kenyatta is scheduled to inspect the facility, accompanied by the Chinese State Councillor and Minister of Foreign Affairs Wang Chi. The new oil terminal was financed by the Kenya Ports Authority and constructed by China. And finally, shares of Airtel Africa hit an all-time high at the end of trading on Wednesday, lifting Nigeria's main stock index on the NGX. This is on the back of its ongoing divestment in Tanzania, where it stands to use the proceeds to reduce debt. And that's today's show. Don't forget that even as the year makes its way up, we are here Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. West African time, keeping African business, economic stories, and financial news front and center. This is Business Edge on News Central. I'm Tolulope. Adeleru Balogun. I'll see you soon.